Hi, friends. It's a rainy day here, which I actually don't mind because it gives me an excuse to do rainy day things. I have been on a bit of a spree, shopping wise, which I promised myself I would not do and then did. So, if you watched my last video, I went through three decks that I had just gotten. One was an eBay purchase, the Piatnik Fiend. One was the Chimanet Tarot, which had been on my list for a long time, in fairness, and I just sort of bit the bullet. And then the L'Oracle de Reflet, which I fell in love with. One of the other things that I bought was this deck, the La Magica Sibilla, which is a Sibilla deck. And I had been watching posts on Sibilla Oracle decks. I think there was an Instagram challenge going on in April, maybe? I can't remember. But I remember seeing these cards, and I had never heard of it before, and then thinking, oh, it looks like Lenormand, and everyone knows who watches my video, or maybe you don't know, that I've been having, that I've more or less given up on it, at least for a while. And then I don't know, I'm an impulse buyer, and I saw this deck in one of Elle from Sacred Seeds videos, and I thought, oh, that would go really good with the French Oracle, L'Oracle de Reflet, just the sort of color and art style. And if I ever wanted to like use them together, clearly I would have to buy it. But I didn't know much about it, and I knew that the titles were in Italian. So what I did, as I do, was I went and bought this deck, which was sort of the original, as far as I know. It's called the Everyday Oracle. It's actually not super expensive. It's actually pretty cheap, honestly. And so what I did was I got this, and I went through and used the little white book that comes with it, and I wrote the English titles underneath on the border, figuring that, if I hated it at some point after I had learned, I could always, cut the borders off or, just get another copy of it. Most of the English titles come from the little white book that comes with it. But in a couple cases, what was in the little, I'm a little blown out here. What was in the, whoops, what was in the little white book was not super clear. So I also relied on Google Translate. But the whole point of getting that deck was to sort of, prepare myself to work with this one, which is it's a modern deck. So in theory, as I understand it, I'm just checking the light here. This is sort of an old deck. There's not in the little book, and I think a lot of you have seen this before. It doesn't say in the little white book sort of how old it is. Although it does, this edition came out in 2007. Now, the little white book in the new version is entirely in Italian. So, I knew that I was need some guidance. But the other thing that I decided to do as I was learning to work with these was to not do what I did with Lenormand, which was spend a bunch of time. What I'm about to say, I want to preface with saying there's no wrong way to do anything, and I don't mean to. I don't mean to criticize, any one way of doing anything. So what I decided to do in this case, because it did not work for me with Lenormand, was to watch a whole bunch of videos, read and read and read. I didn't read a lot of books on Lenormand, but I read a lot, and look at all the rules and memorize all the meanings, and and uh, sort of do it, their way, so to speak. Do it the right way. I was so concerned with doing Lenormand the right way. I think what happened was that I got in my head, and I can't do it anyway, because it doesn't, like, I can't connect to it. I can't connect the cards to the questions. I know what they mean. I know how I'm supposed to be reading it. You know what I mean? I would say the only thing I really don't know off the top of my head when it comes to Lenormand is the houses in the Grand Tableau. But I never got that far. Because even doing small readings, I found it incredibly frustrating. So what I decided to do with this was to look at the little white book, which does have English pages in it, was to look at it only as much as I needed to figure out the English titles. I read the meanings, and then I put it away. And I've just been playing with it, and just experimenting with it. And I have to say that already I feel like I've managed more effective connection than I did with Lenormand, which maybe after a while I can go back and do in that way. So the reason I prefaced this whole sort of ramble by saying there's no wrong way to do anything is because, what I don't want to do is make it seem like, all those methods that I learned were wrong and blah, blah, blah. I think, I think like anything, you learn the rules, you know what I mean? You do. And then you figure out what works for you. In my case, I don't know what I think. I think I got so married to trying to do it right that I don't know. Like, I also have this may come as a surprise to anyone who's been watching my videos much, but I have a somewhat rebellious spirit too. I have I have a tendency to not like being told what to do, and what I can't do, and so and so I think that may have affected that. And so when I opened this deck and I started playing with the cards, I said, I'm not going to worry about that. I'm not going to worry about what anyone thinks. I'm not going to worry about someone commenting and telling me that's wrong, because what we're doing is just, I mean, it's in a way it's kind of silly. Like, I don't want to belittle what we do, because obviously it's useful, or we wouldn't do it and we wouldn't spend so much money on it. But like, if whatever you're working with, if we get so wrapped up in doing it quote right that we never get to make it useful, who cares what we're doing? You know what I mean? So anyway, that may be a slightly controversial opinion. And I know that the way it's supposed to works for a lot of people. When I watch demonstrations of Lenormand, for example, when I read Caitlin Matthews' book, which I can see right from here, I'm amazed by the connections and the lines that they're able to draw between what the cards mean and the question. I can't wrap my mind around how they do it. So obviously those methods work. They just don't work for me. And I have to remind myself frequently that I don't need anyone's permission to do it a different way. Like, my whole life, and this is where I start to get a little personal, right? But my whole life, I have never been good at learning things the way I'm supposed to, or doing things the right way. I mean, just as an example, right? When I was in high school, I failed chemistry. Actually, if you want to be fully on, like, so I work in adult learning now, and I talked about my writing and all of that. I work in adult learning education, for corporate, for a corporation. And I'm a person who failed a class every year of high school, including my senior year. So I didn't actually graduate with my senior class because I had to go to summer school for Algebra 2. Dropped out of college when I was like 20, and then sort of gave up and accepted like a certain amount of like stupidity. I decided that I was stupid because after 9 years of grammar school, and after 4 years of high school and 2 years of community college without graduating, I had kind of given up. And somehow from that, I wound up in corporate training, and then I went back to college as an adult, and I figured out that I wasn't stupid, and that's a whole other story. But the thing that I was going to talk about was in high school. So I failed chemistry, and then I had to take that in summer school, and the teacher that I had in summer school taught the course backwards, and I got a B in it, and I would have gotten an A except I dropped a crucible and broke it, and he took a letter grade off if we broke supplies, which I think was stupid, but whatever. But he taught the course backwards, and I got it. I went from an F to a B in the course of a month because he taught it differently. And so I learned. I don't think I recognized it at that point. I remember saying, why didn't they just teach the course this way normally? Why don't they just do it this way? And as I've gotten older and I've gotten into training, I've learned that the way that school teaches us it's teaching you to pass tests. It's not really teaching you to do much of anything else. But that's again a whole. I'm rambling. Getting on focus. I learned that I can't do it the way other people do. That gave me a great deal of empathy for other people who don't learn the way that most people do. But it also realized that there's no most people. And one of the ways to do anything is just to get in there and fucking figure it out. You know what I mean? Just do it. And I did that with tarot. And I read every book, and I accepted right away that there was no one right way. And all the books I read said there was no one right way. And I dug in, and I loved it, and I did shitty readings, and I did good readings, and I just kept doing it. Lenormand, I followed the rules, and I did it the way you're supposed to do it, and I still can't do it. So that was a long, rambling way to say that I am giving myself permission, and anyone who's watching this permission, to say fuck the rules. You know what I mean? Like, who cares about them? These are cards, and whatever system they came out of was evolved over time and will continue to evolve. And that's that. You know what I mean? So if you need permission, then you have my permission. I'm giving myself permission to say screw it. I know there's a book out there about this. I know that there's people out there who have a lot of experience, and that is great because they are going to help people who learn that way. I don't, and I'm going to do it this way. And by giving myself that permission, I've already had much more fun with this. So, thus endeth the sermon. So what I thought I would do is just quickly look through the deck for anyone who hasn't seen it, and then just sort of play with it a little bit on camera and just sort of see how things go, I wasn't intending to use this deck at all other than to just learn the titles, but I actually really like it. I'm surprised by the fact that I like it. I'm going to do a little quick comparison, just really, really quick. Only because if you love this deck and you want it, you should get it because it is beautiful and it's not super expensive. There's only one place that I could find it, which was the Tarot BG website. Again, I found that through Sacred Seed, Elf from Sacred Seed's website. So, but I'll try to remember to put the link below. But it came super fast. I think from Bulgaria actually. But there are a couple differences in the titles, and that took me a little bit of looking and figuring out. Like, this deck has very clear card associations. This one has card associations, but you have to know the Italian word for the suits. And I didn't. So I had to sort of be, aware of that. So the first, and this is in the order that this deck came in. This deck, I should probably say that if you're going to do what I did and write the English titles on the cards, using the little white book, the deck, which was new and wrapped, was not in the same order. And if I hadn't been paying close attention, I would have screwed it up if I had just been going. The nice thing about, Italian and any of the Latinate languages is that there are a fair amount of cognates in English, so you can kind of figure it out. But there are, some of the words, like the word for nuptials in this deck is old. And actually, if I remember correctly, the literal translation, according to Google Translate, wasn't marriage, it was hymen. So, the weird ways that we've dealt with relationships in the history of humanity. Speaking of history, here I go again. One of the other things that's really interesting, and I'll say this about Lenormand, and I'll say this about this, and I'll say this about tarot or anything else, is that it's so fascinating to look at what a particular culture or people cared about at a given time in history based on the symbols they used to divine information. Fascinating, you know what I mean? Like if you look at what the runes mean, if you look at I Ching, if you look at tarot, if you look at this Sibilla, whatever, what you're getting is a snapshot of the things that people cared about at a given time, you know, and that's just fascinating to me. You know, it'd be interesting to look at the world purely in terms of the world history purely in terms of the way they divined information. You know, what does the oracle at Delphi and the way that young women became the Sibyls there have to say about ancient Greece? What does this have to say about, you know, not so ancient but old Italy? You know, what does coin divination have to say? What does you know, divination by entrail have to say about a culture and what they cared about and what was available to them? So like the anthropology of divination is really sort of an interesting thing to me. Anyway, so I'm going to go through this really quickly. You can, if you're still with me. Oh my god. So the first card, again in order of the way this deck came, was the Doctor. And then we have the young girl, or just in this new deck, girl. We've got servant. The art style in this older Italian deck actually reminds me of the art style in the original Kipper cards. How are we doing? Can we see this okay? Should I zoom in? That may be a little bit better. The quality is not quite as good, but... So this is lightness. Here we have cheerfulness. Now this was one I had to look closely at because this card, artistically similar, but this says Baldoria and this says L'Allegria. I'm going to butcher the Italian. So, you know, what I had to do was sort of look at the 9 here and the 9 here and then do a Google Translate. I can't remember what the literal translation of that word was, but it was like, it was similar. So we've got reunion, great consolation, comforting surprise. Now in this deck, it's just surprise. This one says comforting surprise. There's also on this deck sort of tiny keywords, which I have not looked up the translation of, because in a way I sort of don't want to be primed by it. You know, and this is a case where sort of the less I know, the better, it feels like. Fortuna. This would be friend. Travel. This one I love, Superbia, which is haughtiness. So, but you get a peacock in this old one, and then you get this sort of haughty-looking woman in this one. I think it's really clever. Now, this was the one that was weird. This is nuptials. And when I looked up this word, it does mean nuptials. This one, I would have to go and look, and I use my phone, so I can't grab my Google Translate. But it said, the literal translation was hymen. So that's an interesting linguistic evolution, I guess. This would be the Great Lord, the Lord. Now, there are 2 lovers cards, a man and a woman. So we've got the woman lover, amante, and then the male lover, which has the same title in the old deck. In the new deck, he's innamorato. Which is interesting because I know that there's also the Italian construction of a woman would be an innamorata. So it's interesting. Anyway, but it does make it a little bit clearer. But there's also a love card. So, different from Lenormand where we just have the heart and the ring, for example. Here we have constancy, Constanza or Costanza. So that's interesting. It's interesting the way they've both been depicted too. Faithfulness. Here we have a dog very much like the dog card in Lenormand. Hope. Very similar here. So here's interesting too. This is Men of Letters in the old deck and Artiste, or Artista, but Artist in the new. It's nice to have an art card in an old deck, because we don't really get that in a lot of oracles. I like Man of Letters as a writer, but Artist feels more inclusive. Money. This was Joyous Heart in the old one. It looks like it's just joy in the new one. We get Love, very similar. This is an interesting one. This is Lookout. And here it says Vista or View, which I think is interesting. Casa or Home. Conversation. We have a Priest. Another interesting thing, we have two enemy cards, and again, a man and a woman. So we have La Nemica, which would be the female enemy. And then we have Il Nemico, which would be the male enemy. So very, very interesting there. Sorry. Soldier. Prison. This old card, the title of it just tickles me so much. So in the new one, it's just Jealousy, but in the old one, it's Distraught by Jealousy. So heavy and hilarious. We have Misfortune. Longing. Love that. Death. I like this new sort of, I think, in just reading for someone else, this, as many people have pointed out, in older times, people had a much more intimate relationship with death. It was much more, I think people just accepted it as much more inevitable than we do these days, and we're so terrified of it. Me among them. You know what I mean? That I think this card sort of certainly is less scary than the coffin. Although again, sort of the history of the world that we get through the art of it and through the way things are illuminated is interesting to me. So here we have Sick Person. Here we have Widower. Old Woman. Worry. The Merchant. This is an interesting one. Married Woman. And I just that one took me by surprise. So when I looked at the keywords in the little white book, where is she? Married Woman. It's again, you sort of assume that there's some basic connection to old in the little white book. The meaning of that one says respect or attraction toward a mother of a family. Interesting. There's no married man in the deck. Just married woman. Whoops. Messenger. Not unlike Lenormand there. Thief. Not unlike the mice. This one was interesting too. So this is Delirious in the old deck. In the new one, I can't remember what the translation was, but it was like ecstasy or elation. You know, so the intent seems like this delirious seems a whoa, whoops, sorry. I get so excited. The delirious seems to indicate drunken, and clearly, and I'm not, by the way, I'm not drunk. The drunkenness, just clumsy. This one always tickles me too. The translation of the old deck is gift of precious stones. I mean, how much more specific can you get? Child. Thought. Melancholy. Falseness. Now this one cracks me up too. This cat is not... This cat will cut you. I just want to point that out. Maid. Letter. Room. And then this new deck also has 2 significator cards, which you may or may not want to use. So that is just a quick comparison of the 2. I have not shuffled this deck yet, so I think I'm going to give that a go just to see how it feels. Part of me wonders if... Oh, it shuffles really well. I was going to say part of me wonders if I should wait. Oh, you know, I should zoom out, huh? If I should wait until I have the card titles memorized, but I can always go and look them up. And you do, I mean, you do get a fairly quick sense of what they are just after quickly looking at them. So this deck is a bit more tarot-sized than this. This is very much playing card size, but if you look at the 2 together, this is a much larger one. And I will admit, you know, I do, in this case, like the smaller size, but it is what it is. If everything were the same, why would we need more? Right? Of course, right. This is fun to shuffle. It's got sort of a, like the cards are smooth, but there's like a nice sort of roughness to them that feels nice. I'm actually going to do a little reading now to sort of show you how I've been, you know, playing. So I'm going to actually just sort of be quiet for a sec while because I am going to read for someone. So I'm just going to do some actual shuffling. Let me get these other things. I'm going to keep this other deck nearby in case I need the translation. All right, so I am going to do a 9 card as I do. And I'm going to hope that it's going to fit. In the viewfinder. Yeah, actually, I managed to get that all in. I could slide it up just a touch. That's good. All right. So this is a friend of mine, in fact, who just had sort of an upset. And the question that I asked as I was shuffling was sort of how do you move forward after the upset? So the cards that were drawn, the center card is Lookout. The top left was Money, and then across the rows we've got Money, Comforting Surprise, Home. We've got Lord, Lookout, and Haughtiness. And then we've got Reunion, Priest, and Doctor. So what I'm going to do is just sort of talk through this as I do, and sort of talk to you through how I am kind of choosing to interpret things. And the first thing I will say is that, again, I am not pulling meanings from the Little White Book. What I'm essentially doing is drawing associations between the idea of the card and its association in life. So, for example, Money is easy, but Doctor, what is it? I ask myself, what does a doctor do? Well, a doctor diagnoses and heals. So, what I'm trying to sort of do is make connections between an old idea and modern life, essentially. So here's how I'm going to do this. Trigger warning for anyone who feels strongly that this has to be done a certain way. If you've gotten this far in the video, you know that's not how I'm playing the game in this case. So I'm going to look for my first two cards, my center and first, as my overall theme, and I've got sort of a view of Money. I've got a look out of Money. And so, again, because I'm talking about someone who had someone who had an upset at work, what I'm really starting with is, hey, you know what I mean? Like, you got to keep your eye on the money to start with. Like, and the lookout it's not just like right now, it's long term. So you've got to think about money long term. So whatever happened, your central thing is like getting by, which makes sense because, it's so work related. So, that's the overall that's the first message. Now the rest of this colors and helps me understand more and may give me additional paths. But the top row I sort of look at, we've got Money, Comforting Surprise, and Home. And what that suggests is essentially that there's safety and abundance at home, but there's something there when you get back that's going to remind you why you do what you do. Someone in your family is going to do a thing that reminds you of why you put up with the upset, why you do and why you keep going, even though this thing has happened that's been upsetting, because there's comfort there, there's surprise, there's safety. In the second row, we've got an interesting sort of series of cards, right? Because we have Lord and I have Haughtiness. And the Lord association to me is just sort of someone with power, and then Haughtiness, sort of smugness. And so your view right now is being surrounded by people with power and a certain amount of attitude, and here you are in the middle sort of looking at that. But with the lookout, with the view, I get sort of a long range, so you've got to look beyond the surface experience of people being sort of powerful and smug around you. You know what I mean? There's more to it than that, but also you've got to look at the long game. Looking at the third row, we've got Reunion, we've got Priest, and we've got Doctor. And in a weird way, just sort of knowing the situation as I do, I would almost think that the Lord and the haughty woman here sort of turn into the Priest and the Doctor. And what we do in this case is we reunite with our guides and our healers, so we become part of the fold again with the people that we respect and who have guided us over the years. And been our advisors, been our confidants, that the reunion will come, you know what I mean, because the relationships haven't changed, even though around you right now feels like, people are holding all the cards and they're sort of dangling them over your head. Now I can look at the columns, and so if I look at the first column, I've got money, Lord, and reunion. So this, in essence, sort of suggests that, my initial thesis was, keep an eye on the money right now. I think doing that will eventually help you reunite with your own power, with your own sense of power. The middle column gives us comforting surprise, lookout, and priest. And so what I see here again with this central idea of sort of looking at the long game, looking at the long run, the closer you look at things, you will find something to comfort and surprise you. You will find something calming, potentially through your own faith, your own belief system. If you go to that, if you look closely, your foundation of faith, your foundation of your beliefs will comfort and will help you get through and may even surprise you in the long run. And then in the final column, we've got house, haughtiness, and doctor. And this is an interesting column, right? Because it's the haughtiness card in this reading is sort of the only one that doesn't feel like it has a light side. Everything else can sort of be light and shadow here. But the haughtiness is sort of not good in most situations. But what I would say in this case is that, when you're home, you can act however you want, because you're the leader there, and people will give you time to heal. People will they know that that's what you need. So if you're going to go home and be a little bit of a diva, that's okay, because that's part of the process of healing and getting better. And where if you can't do that at home, where can you do it? Just because I can, and the reading itself is going more quickly than my blabbing before it. If I look at the crosses through, the X, we've got money, lookout, and doctor. So, again, sort of keeping our eye on the money in the long term is going to help us get better in the long term. And then we have reunion, lookout, and home, or home, lookout, reunion, depending on how you do the cross. Either way, again, sort of looking for home, returning home, reuniting with home is going to be a comforting experience. So, overall, you know what I mean? Like, this feels like pretty good advice. It's an upset at work, but you got to keep looking at the money. And then here are all these other things that are going to sustain you as you go along. You know what I mean? Your home, your family, looking beyond what seems like the power and smugness of others, etc. So, that's a quick little sample reading with this deck. And again, I feel like I've gotten more out of this as a reader than I have out of any, Lenormand reading I've done, and partly just because I've said screw the rules. I'm just gonna do it. So, again, I will put my disclaimer in that the rules are good and useful for some folks, and for some folks they're not. And you got to know how you learn, and you got to accept how you learn, and you just got to do it, because there's no board of rulers that's coming down to say you're not reading this right. You may get people out there who say you're doing it wrong, but that's fine. Haters gonna hate. That's right, I said it. Anyway, I hope that this was interesting, as always, and I hope you're having a good rainy Friday, as I am, and I hope you take care. Be good.